Welcome. Today we will be talking about wardley mapping. I will give an introduction to wardley mapping with some examples applied to some of our current innovation projects. There will be some reading tips and time for Q&A. So what is wardley mapping and what can it be used for? It's for creating maps that can be used for making sense of a situation, for communication about flow of value and movement of technology, and to help making strategic choices. In other words, it's an aid to the process of observe, orient, decide and act. It's useful for innovation, for business strategy, tactics, service design, and for communications about those subjects. So a wardley map is a sketch of a business, a market, or any other work system. The user or users is placed at the top, and then the lines show the needs for fulfilling the benefit, and the needs that are linking the resource to the benefit. So then you might say, isn't this what the service blueprint does, more or less? Well, there are some similarities, but there are also some important differences. So this is a simple wardley map of online banking. To deliver the benefit of banking online to the user, there is a need for security, for a website, for a CRM system, for example. These systems also have needs like an ID service, a platform for running the applications, computing hardware with storage and storage and power. So now let's axes. Just like in the service blueprint, the vertical axis represents the distance to the user. But instead of visualizing a timeline with touch points in the customer journey, on the horizontal axis we instead have the maturity of the solution. Along the bottom of the horizontal axis you can see different labels for the maturity, from novel and unproven in Genesis, to custom, to product, to commodity. And that is how an offering matures from new to established. And we will look more in this in detail later. So what can you learn from a wardley map? You can use it to visualize the flow of value, to see which value creating functions are closest versus more distance to the customer and user. Visualize and discuss how functions mature from novel through well-proven product to utility. To decide, for example, which to build as custom solutions and which to buy off the shelf or as a service. You can also use the information to decide which new emerging technology to invest in. Use the information to decide which way of working or doctrine is suitable for a certain maturity stage, and identify duplication of effort and improve operational excellence. This is Simon Wardley. He obviously the creator of wardley mapping. So I met Simon, I think it was around 2002 at a photo trade show in Germany, and I had launched an online photo service. This was the company, and it was later sold to a Nordic printing group. So at that time, Simon was also running an online photo service called Photango. So just like us, they had a similar problem, namely number of users constantly increasing, and so of course were the computing and storage costs. So Photango had invented a way to decouple the code from the servers. So they were abstracting that, and were able to deploy virtual servers and balance the computing in a seamless way to the needs. So basically they did cloud computing many years before Amazon came along and launched their cloud services. And Simon was thinking about what would be the next logical step for Fatango, and he realized the potential for serverless, and that in order to get a high adoption of this new serverless cloud technology, they should open source the core technology and build new applications on top of it. So Simon was both lucky and unlucky, because Fatango was acquired by Canon. And Canon's management had been advised by management consultants that the next big thing would be 3D TVs, and that they should get rid of Fatango. Cloud technology was not really on people's radar yet, so Canon didn't consider it valuable. So maybe the management consultants had been looking at the Gartner hype cycle and thought that 3D TVs would be a thing, and that resonated with Canon's management, so 3D TV was the next focus for that division of Canon for a few years. As it turned out, however, 3D TVs didn't become a thing, although many companies throw a lot of money into developing it, both hardware and content. Does anyone have a 3D TV at home? Please raise your hand. I would be really curious to hear about that. So Simon made the point that many companies make these mission and vision statements that are sometimes not so well rooted in strategy, but more reflect the current fashion in the line of business they are in, without taking into account the different competition factors. And he went on to saying that you might even just use a template like this one, a blah template. Our strategy is blah, we will lead to a blah effort of the market through our use of blah and blah to build a blah, and so on. And just to demonstrate this, he even created a strategy as a service generator. You go to this web page and you can just it will auto-generate a strategy for you from a set of different popular buzzwords in a random configuration. So, for example, here's another one, and a third one, and you just hit refresh if you're not satisfied with the one you get. These buzzwords are a few years old now, but if they were updated a little bit of design thinking, maybe co-creation, blockchain, sustainable, circular, so on, you would get something that is very much in line with many of these mission and vision statements today. So Simon, with his disappointment with the management consultants, that led Simon to look at other sources of knowledge and strategy, like Sun Tzu, who wrote this excellent book about strategy more than 2,500 years ago, and John Boyd, who wrote the who was behind the OODA loop theory, observe, orient, decide, act, that combines cognitive science and game theory and applied that to flying fighter jets and many other things. So John Boyd came up with the idea of the OODA loop when he was fighting against faster enemy planes in the Korea War. He found that it was possible to win over opponents in air-to-air combat, even if you're flying a slower, less responsive plane, if you're able to be better at judging the situation, maneuvering and decision making. So it says that you should first observe, then orient, then decide, and lastly act, and this cycle repeats. This is also something that you recognize from agile software development, right? To be able to make changes faster than your competitors, which leads to a competitive advantage. So Sun Tzu talks about 5 factors that matter in competition: purpose, landscape, doctrine, and leadership. And we will be looking more into this further on. Here it is important to not confuse purpose with objectives. For companies, it is important, of course, to generate revenues, and for all companies, right? So that they can pay wages and generate a return on investment to their shareholders. So one can set objectives for these outcomes that you can see on the right side for growth and profitability and sustainability, for example. But it's important to remember that objectives and purpose are not the same thing. So now if we combine these two concepts and arrange them in a circle, we get this. We observe the landscape we are competing in and how it's changing, and this changes what is meant by climate. The changes may be, for example, driven by technology or by changing user needs, new policies, increasing global competition, or driven by sustainability needs, for example. And then we orient. We evaluate and make sense of the information we observe, which leads to a doctrine, a logically reasoning about the needs, what needs to be done, and how we should organize ourselves to be able to take action. And then next, a decision is made. Which of the options do you act upon? And then you act, and depending on the outcome of the action you now made, you're testing a hypothesis, right? And depending on the outcome of the action, now you have a new situation to observe, and the cycle starts over again. And then you evaluate the purpose, and you can see there are actually two whys: the why of movement and the why of purpose. So the first one, the why of purpose, is about choosing which game to play, and the why of movement is which moves to make within that chosen game. So the decision of which game to play is of course done much less often, while the why of movement needs to be constantly re-evaluated. And also in innovation management you have a similar decision cycle in the ISO innovation management standard. It's called Plan, Do, Check, Act, but it's basically the same idea as the OODA loop. Now back to the subject of maps. Why maps? Well, let's take this example. With this map of an ancient Roman city, and we mark 20 points of interest and maybe 5 strategic points along the river. Now if you would describe each journey from A to B and back again with 25 words, that's 20,000 words. And if you want to describe any of these 25 points on the map back and forth, each with 25 words, that is that number of Wikipedias to describe that in text. So a reason is that a map is useful, that it's a very condensed way to convey information. Another, that it's a visual model. It's much easier to have a conversation about different views of the world than having an argument about different stories describing that world. A map always has an anchor, and directions have meanings. So in a wardley map, the anchor is the user, and the vertical axis is closeness to the customer, and the horizontal axis is the maturity of the offering. Let's try this with a coffee shop. Let's assume that a customer wants a coffee and a biscuit. To make coffee, we need beans, we need staff to make it, we need water and power. And notice here how power and water are placed at the bottom of the map. and they are also commodities, so they are placed far to the right. They are, this is because they are invisible to the customer, more or less. Now that we have this map, we can have a conversation about which benefits to the user are most visible and valuable, and what their alternatives are, and how competition makes things change. So this particular cafe makes their own chocolate chip cookies in-house, so staff and ingredients are needed for that. So then with competition, offerings evolve and are being offered maybe in new ways, either to offer a higher value or to reduce cost to improve competitiveness. Let's say the competitor across the street also starts selling very similar cookies, but they are bought off the shelf. Now we're starting to talk about movement. In this case, you might, for example, consider what it would be like to replace the barista with a robot and a mobile app. Not saying it's a sensible move, but let's experiment with the idea. How would people feel? How would they be prepared? Would they be prepared to pay as much? Or maybe to replace the in-house made cookies with cookies made in a bakery. Is it visible enough that in-house made cookies are in fact worth it because they're made in the cafe? Should the cafe maybe invest more in marketing to make the point that they are homemade, to justify the price? Or maybe people don't care. Now we are beginning to be able to have these discussions. So here we can see what the map looks like now that we introduced off-the-shelf cookies and a robot replacing the barista. We can see what it was like before and what it looks like with the proposed change. And we're also able to plot the cost of each action and component that goes into delivering the benefit to the customer, as the lines are actually flow of capital. Now we can have a discussion about which benefits are most valuable to the customer, which are less, and what do each cost and what is the profit. We can also have a discussion about where the offerings are moving. Are there new customers arriving in this market? Do they have new needs? What would be needed to offer things to them? If competitors introduce no new ways of offering this value, how would we respond to that? So the market adoption of each new technology goes through an S-curve in 4 distinct stages. First, very few people have access initially, maybe just the inventors themselves, right? So this is a flat line at the bottom. Then things speed up during the Genesis stage. Still unclear what the needs are, and capabilities are still poor. There is a high risk, but also high potential to gain a competitive advantage for companies who invest at the right time. The next stage is custom built. Because of the uncertainty of the needs and the market size, it's still unclear, and therefore things needs to be custom built rather than series produced. Next phase is product, where the sales volume and performance is increasing at a tremendous speed. This is a very profitable place to be as a company, but only for those who invested at the right time in getting on the curve at the early stages, because otherwise they're probably too late to be in the game. And then later on, when penetration is higher, demand starts to flatten off and competition increases. This is also the stage where it's very clear what is needed. So in the commodity phase, diminishing returns on the current technology or offering, and the demand flattens out. It becomes a commodity supplied as a utility, for example, electricity or cloud storage or things like that. But in reality, there is just not one, but several S-curves for each offering. Here we can see a stack of S-curves of computing, from mainframes to mini computers to PCs to today's cloud and mobile computing. Next, probably quantum computing. Each new technology initially has a lower performance or maybe more narrow application than the previous. And this makes it difficult for companies who have been successful in the past with a certain technology or way of offering to be successful with the new, because of the inertia and fear of cannibalization and comfort with the old way of working of their existing business. This is known as the innovator's dilemma. This is the explanation that is often not the established companies in an industry that revolutionizes that industry with new innovations, but more often entirely new ones that are new to the industry. They do not suffer from the pull of the past holding them back. So, taking the electric car industry as an example, Volvo made this creatively named car concept called elbil in 1976. This falls clearly in the genesis stage. Car was much of a compromise in many areas, in range, in size, in comfort and price. It used the heavy lead batteries that were available at the time, and then it didn't have very interesting performance or price characteristics, of course. No one would be prepared to pay for that performance at that price. So next, custom built. Tesla piggybacked on another technology, namely the mass-produced lithium batteries for electronics that began to become available. With much better performance to weight than lead acid, the car could have a very nice performance and range. And this enabled Tesla to verify the hypothesis that electric cars would have an attractive niche market in high-performance sports cars, even at a very high price. Next stage is product. This is the early and main product phases are very highly profitable with high growth and high margins. Provided that you were part in the early stages, you might have competitive advantages, for example, in know-how, in brand, and networks, and patents. If you were not part in the early stages, you probably have a weaker position and may have either to choose a smaller niche, or maybe need to be, or will maybe be forced out of the market altogether. As the competition increases, we get into and the benefit of the current technology or way of offering decreases. New business models typically start to emerge, like service and rental. This is also possible because of that the needs and wants and economics are well understood, so that companies can take the risk of offering these as a service. And then the last stage of the market, that's utility, where the benefit is delivered in the same way as utilities such as electricity and water. Mobility as a service is heading in this direction. So let's look at the wardley map for a private car owner. Needs are the car itself, obviously, but also things like service, parking, and fuel. Some services are somewhat more customized to the owner, like financing and insurance, and that is why they are more to the left, more towards the custom, whereas some things that are commodities like fuel and service are more to the right and lower because they are less visible. Now, if we look at the mobility as a service use case instead, the ride-hailing app is much closer. This is shown with a yellow dot here. The ride-hailing app is much closer to the user than the car. Which make of car that arrives is usually less important than availability and price. The ride has become a commodity. The fleet operator responsible for making sure that the car arrives, the fleet operator still needs the car and all of the services to keep it running, just as like in the previous example. But it is less visible to the user. On the left-hand side, new digital services are arriving, such as MasterCard's new biometric ID check that relies on blockchain and AI, and AI-based route and cost optimization services, for example. This changes the landscape quite a bit. So the digital services are what are most visible to the customer, and there are also many emerging digital solutions that can reduce friction, enhance security, and optimize operations for the fleet operator. These become the new competitive advantages. So for a car OEM now, the car product becomes much less of a competitive advantage because it's less visible. Sometimes a car of one brand arrives, sometimes another that is of less interest perhaps than availability and price. This leads to that car OEMs must fight for survival, either become white label suppliers to mobility brands, start their own, or find new services that can operate on top of existing products. So every offering on the planet evolves under the pressure of competition and goes through stages. Let's take electricity as an example, starting at 1 in this graph. So the so-called Baghdad battery was invented more than 2,000 years ago and was used to electroplate metal objects with gold. 150 years ago, steam generators were used to create electricity in factories. And then next, in the product stage, Edison started to build electrical grids, and it became a household product. Today, it has become an invisible utility. Now, on top of the available electricity, now new products and services could evolve. Marconi started experimenting with the radio. First it had some custom military use, and then it became a consumer product with broadcast radio, and later it evolved to become a utility, the mobile phone, which has become something that is assumed and that everyone has. So users have different attitudes to technology, shown by the technology adoption curve. A small fraction of the market want early access to technology even when it's very immature. Others are early adopters and want to gain a competitive advantage. The largest group of users fall into the early and late majority, and the laggards accept the technology last. This adoption curve was popularized in the 1990s by Geoffrey Moore, and it's very true of enterprise customers in relation to technology. For example, when it requires a lot of change in the company. For example, changing an important IT system with all of the implications that has for the company. But in the recent years, however, the curve has become the shape of this adoption curve has changed quite a lot. It looks now much more like a shark fin with a much faster uptake. This started with consumer apps like Spotify and Netflix, but the same behavior is now becoming true even in enterprise settings because of ease of use and cloud access to applications like Salesforce and Slack and Miro that do not require installation but just can be used as a utility. And offerings of different maturity stages are also bought differently by customers. There are 4 distinct buying cultures that fit different stages: value captured, value created, value added, and value offered. Each requires a different approach to sales and delivery. So when we chart all of these different offerings and how they evolve, we can see a Z pattern. Each offering, when it matures, enables a new offering of higher value and higher visibility to the customer and a higher potential competitive advantage. Here we have the battery, the electricity at the early stages evolving to utility, radio evolving into mobile communications and mobile phones, the early digital computer, which was highly specialized and expensive. It has become a commodity through cloud and mobile and edge computing. And now we have the new AI and ML, which is evolving. The current stage is intelligent agents. It will be enabling autonomous driving and more. Also, the cash flow is different at different stages. Using the term from Strategizer, we can call these different stages explore and exploit. You need to make investment first, revenues come later. Different ways of working are also suitable in different maturity stages. In the early stages, Agile and Scrum is strong. Here the focus is on learning and creating the highest value. Information needs to be open and teams self-organizing. Then, as offerings mature, a more lean production approach is suitable. The operational model is well defined, so focus now is to eliminate waste and adhere to a more strict process. And then in the most mature phase, where margins are slim and there is high competition, it's important to cut costs. So focus then is efficiency and outsourcing and operational excellence. The culture is more hierarchical and command and control. You can also categorize offerings by their competitive position, from producing raw materials to producing goods to delivering services to creating experiences to executing transformation. So one way to look at this from the AFRY perspective is that I believe that our purpose then would be to help to move our customers upwards in this value chain with digital and design as tools for creating a sustainable future. There is movement up in this value chain, but also down. If a company stands still, their offering will be less competitive and they will need to cut costs to compete on price. What used to be rare and expensive is becoming commonplace and cheap. So this 5 megabyte hard drive that you see on the left in the picture used to be rented out by IBM to the US Department of Defense for today's equivalent of $160,000 per month. Now you get 6,000 times that for free when you invite a friend to Dropbox. Here we have talked a lot about products, but we haven't talked so much about services. What about professional services? Are they also prone to commoditization, like lawyers? The first robot lawyer was launched in 2015. It offers automated legal support in 200 different legal use cases. So a good question, I think, that we might ask ourselves in the consulting business: are we in consulting immune to digital transformation? And what would a wardley map of our business look like? And what does the movement of maturity and commoditization look like in consulting? A research report pointed out that consulting firms are facing digital transformation too, just like their customers, and should act upon that. Clayton Christensen said a number of years ago that asset-based consulting would be the solution to this, and he proposed that rather than renting out consultants by the hour, consulting companies should create combined digital and personal services that makes it more valuable for clients to stay the longer they work with a consulting firm. Also, Forrester Research made the prediction that soon asset-based consulting will change the revenue and delivery models of consulting substantially. So I think a good advice can be had from Wayne Gretzky, who said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been." Thank you so much for listening. Here is some recommended reading. You can download actually for free the Wardley's excellent book on wardley mapping. It's also available in paper form, and I also recommend greatly to read Mike Baxter's The Strategy Manual. These two books together will make you very well equipped to work with these things, I think. So time for questions now. Thank you so much.